Donald Trump has always demanded absolute loyalty, but now that that loyalty is drying up, things are getting very bad for him very quickly. Marjorie Taylor Greene, in particular, seems to be having the time of her life openly going after Donald Trump, and that alone tells you how fractured his coalition has become. But she is not the first person to start raising questions about the Epstein scandal after being pushed out of Trump's inner circle. A former White House advisor who was fired is now coming forward, exposing Donald Trump and blowing this Epstein scandal wide open, especially as we learned today that 95,000 new photos have been released, and we are going to break down all of it. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy the work we do here, to hit that subscribe button. It truly goes a long way in supporting our coverage as we continue to expose this cover-up. Now, before we get into that fired advisor who is now intensifying the Epstein scandal even further and laying bare the cover-up Donald Trump has been involved in for years, dating back to Epstein's death and even well before that, I want to start with Adam Schiff calling out the active cover-up that is happening right now under Pam Bondi authority at the Department of Justice, right here.
I'm not sure that you can be fully confident of anything in this administration, including the inspector generals, most of which were fired in the early days of the Trump administration, and whether they've been replaced by anyone of any independence is very much an open question. But I have more confidence generally in the offices of Inspector General than I do in the top leadership of the Justice Department. There have been reports that the FBI devoted 1,000 agents to combing through these files, flagging wherever Trump's name appeared, and there's good reason to be suspicious of whether any documents that might be incriminating the president will see the public light. So one way of trying to make sure that the disclosures are fulsome, as required by the law that was passed on a bipartisan basis, is to get the Inspector General to review the custody of these documents to determine whether any are missing. And the administration is supposed to give us a log of anything they're withholding to determine whether that log is complete or whether the thing's missing from there too.
Yes, it feels like if you were able to look at the log, which they should be able to, if there's more than names, if there's long swaths of things, it raises a lot of questions. Now, the deadline, as I just noted, for the White House to release all the files under the bill Congress passes a week from tomorrow. What expectation? You know, I think a lot of people out there are thinking we're going to see everything that day. It seems hard to believe that's going to be the case. I wish it was. But what expectation do you have on what we may see that day?
Well, I guess my expectation is that they will produce something. And now that something that they produce may be heavily redacted, and they may claim that those redactions are merely to protect the privacy of the victims. And if they are redactions for that purpose, they would be completely legitimate. We want their privacy respected. But do we trust the administration to make those redactions only for that purpose, or to over-redact in a way to protect or avoid anything incriminating or embarrassing of the president or any of his allies? I don't think we can have that confidence. I would feel much better if I had a neutral party like an inspector general making those determinations. And in the log that they provide, it could say just very generically, this category of documents has been withheld, those documents going to an ongoing investigation. Again, that is not going to, I think, satisfy anyone. So we'll see how fulsome the production is and how much we're going to have to fight to really see what they're holding.
We know exactly what Pam Bondi is trying to do here, and we've known all along what Donald Trump's real objective was when he pretended to support transparency. When he signed that bill supposedly forcing the release of the Epstein files, we knew Donald Trump would rush to take credit. And he did, almost immediately. But we also knew That was where it would end. The goal was always to make people believe that signing a piece of paper meant everything had been released, that the truth was out, that transparency had been achieved, and that everyone should just move on. But Pam Bandy has placed obstacle after obstacle after obstacle in the way of any real transparency, because this has never been about the truth. It has always been about political games, narrative control, and running interference for Donald Trump. And while Pam Bandy is desperately trying to block whatever she can from coming out of the DOJ, the reality is there is only so much she can do. Pam Bandy has no authority over Robert Garcia. She has no control over the House Oversight Committee, and she certainly has no power to interfere with the Epstein estate. That is exactly why the release of more than 95,000 photos today is so significant. They prove that this information cannot be stopped, but they also reveal something that has been consistently underreported when we talk about the Epstein cover-up, and that is the connection between Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein. As we saw today, these photos paint a much clearer and more disturbing picture of a relationship that we already knew existed and that has been widely reported on. They show just how close Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein were, and that this closeness continued right up until Epstein's death. The reason I find these photos so interesting and why I believe this story needs far more attention than it has received so far is because the Epstein cover-up didn't begin during Donald Trump's first term as president. It goes back even earlier, well before he ever entered the White House. According to Jeffrey Epstein's brother, this issue was already a concern for Trump while he was still on the campaign trail, which tells us something critical. Trump understood early on that this was a serious political liability for him, but we need to go back even further than that. Donald Trump has long surrounded himself with people who were close to Jeffrey Epstein, whether that was because he believed those individuals could protect him from legal exposure or similar crimes, or because he preferred to keep people who had damaging information on him close rather than treating them as enemies. That pattern is important to recognize. It's something that cannot be ignored. Then we look at Trump's first administration. He hires Alan Dershowitz to defend him during his impeachment. He brings Alex Acosta into his cabinet. These are individuals with well-documented connections to Jeffrey Epstein, and instead of distancing himself, Donald Trump kept them close and elevated them within his inner circle. And then there's Steve Bannon. After being fired from the Trump administration, Bannon went on to essentially act as a public relations figure for Epstein. The two were close, regularly talking about their shared ideas on populism and politics. That alone is disturbing, especially considering Epstein was a billionaire pedophile, yet they maintained a relationship. Both men also understood that their closeness could put strain on their respective relationships with Donald Trump. Jeffrey Epstein spoke at length about how afraid Donald Trump was of the friendship between Bannon and Epstein. And Steve Bannon, right up until the moment Epstein died or was killed, which is still disputed and certainly, in my opinion, continued talking about how there were people after Epstein. So you have Bannon potentially doing PR work to regain favor with Trump through Epstein, while Epstein himself openly discussed how worried Trump was. The more we learn about this relationship, the clearer it becomes that the Epstein cover-up is not just something Pam Bondi and Kash Patel are involved in right now. This appears to be part of a much broader conspiracy that links both Trump administrations. That's an important lens to keep in mind when we consider what other information might still be out there. And there is a lot more coming. This is no longer just about what's emerging from the Epstein estate. Newly released court filings, additional evidence, and grand jury testimony are making it increasingly clear that Pam Bandy can only block so much for so long. And Ari Melber broke all of that down right here.
Legal developments tonight, and they look like this, and I'm going to walk you right through them. These are two separate cases where two judges have ruled for major Epstein transparency and basically changed what is longstanding precedent on what materials you release from criminal probes. I'm going to walk you through it here in plain English. The big development today is one of these cases, a judge granting a motion to release sensitive Epstein records, specifically to unseal what are grand jury records in the Ghislaine Maxwell case. Now that mirrors another ruling, and I'll tell you about that as well. But if this sounds like a huge change, it is. If you think back to every case you've ever looked into, maybe you're a true crime Whitey Bulger fan, maybe you remember the Mueller probe, grand jury materials are protected by Rule 6, which is one of those sort of long-standing rules of the federal court system. And the reason the grand jury materials are usually secret is because, unlike, say, an open trial where the government is presenting certain evidence, this is a private process designed to decide whether you get to trial or not. And for many reasons of fairness, say they don't indict and move forward, you don't just release everything they ever talked about. It could affect people's lives or careers. That's generally the baseline. But there is a new law in town. It's called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. You probably recall it because it was passed over the objections of Donald Trump all year. Then at the end, he claimed he was for it. He was forced into signing it. Republicans bucked him. And that law now requires the release of a ton of different types of Epstein material, colloquially referred to as the Epstein Files, this month by December 19th. So this new ruling responds to that law, and it comes just after another judge agreed in another case that also involves Epstein in Florida. Remember there was that earlier Epstein case down there? So a Florida judge down there orders those Epstein grand jury records to also be released by the same logic. Now, this may sound like one of these legal weeds type things, but I want to point out a couple points on this with you.
They understand that there is only so much they can do to keep this cover-up going. There is a limit to the power that Pam Bandy has, and public opinion has shifted so dramatically on this issue that there is nothing left they can do to make people stop paying attention or stop talking about Jeffrey Epstein. And that is exactly what we are going to continue doing on this show every single day. If you want to support that work, as always, you can hit that subscribe button and leave a like on this video. If you stuck around until the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I will see you soon.